An airplane crashed into the Andes Mountains just minutes before it was meant to land at its destination. Despite several attempts to find the black box and discover what happened to the aircraft, the unknown causes behind the crash remain a source for many theories. Today, we explore the strange case of EAL Flight 980. This is Red Web. Welcome back, Task Force, to another episode of Red Web, the podcast all about unsolved mysteries, true crime, and the supernatural. I'm your resident mystery enthusiast, Trevor Collins, and joining me hearing this case for the very first time, Alfredo Diaz.
Man, it's always a little terrifying hearing about missing planes.
Yeah, they go down.
It is. I think that statistically wise, though, you have a better chance of getting into a car accident than a plane crash happening.
Yes.
But still terrifying and not zero, which is unfortunate. But the fact that planes would just go missing, especially to like in the mountains, not necessarily like in the ocean.
Oh, man.
Just I don't know. It's a different level of fear.
Yeah.
Like not being recovered. I don't know. I never really thought about that. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, man, I try to disassociate.
if you were to go and then they find you and your remains in your body and then there's a conclusion as opposed to just never seen again.
Right. Ooh, I need a conclusion because, well, listen, when I fly over the ocean and the few times I've had the chance to do it, go to Europe, go to Australia, I disassociate because I'm basically flying in space. You are out there over nothing, especially if you're going to Australia from the United States. And yeah, if you go down, it's very likely that you're going to go missing. Thankfully, with this flight, it was only missing for a brief time. It was found, but the mystery behind why it went down only drives the theories here. And I think we're going to break down kind of what happened with the crash as far as we're aware, the timeline, then the investigation, everything we're able to know. And then that's going to lay the rocky groundwork that all these theories kind of live on. There's conspiracies around it. There's some mundane answers. But of course, with any mystery, it's always the unknown that fuels the most chaotic answers.
Apologies up ahead if anyone is listening to this episode while boarding a flight.
Oh, no.
Or on a flight. I didn't even...
No. It's all good.
Just thought about that for a second because people was like, oh, I listened to it while doing other things, driving, going to work, or resting, relaxing, traveling. I'm like, oh, yeah. Well, you...
Listen, if you're hopping on an airline in Bolivia, maybe, tune out just for like until you land. But otherwise, you're good, you know? And I'll put this one out there. EAL, or Eastern Airlines, they don't exist anymore. I'm not going to say it's because of this crash, but they did shut down like 6 years after. So we're good. They're far away. They can't hurt you anymore. But listen, there's been some violent turbulence in my past, and I just got to trust the engineering involved. Don't look at the wings. Don't look at them bounce and flex. Okay, they're composites. They can do that.
Yeah, it was terrifying at first when you first board a flight. You see things bouncing and kind of moving and even like a rough landing, and you kind of realize, oh, that's normal.
Yeah.
It's terrifying, but normal.
It's very spooky, but normal. But then when you really pull back the veil, I did a lot of aeronautical studies in my time, undergraduate or whatever. And you are kind of in a tin can with a nice facade. You have some seats, some carpet, and some plastic paneling to make it all look nice. But honestly, it could look like a 1960s Saturn V spacecraft. It could just look as raw as it is, and you'd be like, that's what I'm in?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nuts and bolts.
Can you imagine, too? There was just like year one, even year three of just planes being a thing.
Yeah.
Just being like, sure, I'll get on that.
Right. I don't want to alpha beta test this thing. I'll wait till version 2.0.
Yeah, I guess that's my question for the task force and to Christian and Trevor. What year would it have to be for you to go, okay, I am good to actually jump on an airplane, this new thing called an airplane?
I'd probably say the 40s, maybe the 30s. So I'm still early on. I'm quite early on, but that's with hindsight.
Oh, so like you'd be a quick adopter then?
Yeah, well, yeah, but
I'm like, how many years since like the first commercial flight would you wait to fly?
If it were like the brand new technology, like look at this inventive way to travel, my mind goes to like 3.
Same.
At least. Yeah.
Yeah. Trevor's jumping on like instantly on that wing. Apparently.
Listen, planes were out there pretty early.
Yeah, they were.
You know, Amelia Earhart's flying over oceans in the 30s. She went disappearing, so that doesn't really help my case. But it could have been aliens. I think there was external interference. But listen, I don't know. I think we started hitting commercial levels in strongly by the 30s. I'm not hopping on a 1917 aircraft. Okay, that's all I'm saying. If I'm the Wright brothers and I'm floating off the ground 3 feet for 100 yards, sure, you're gliding with style. You're Buzz Lightyear on the ground. But after that, yeah, I'm going to take a little beat. But, you know, I'm also not wearing the Apple Vision, the 5-pound AR thing yet. You know, I'll wait. You know, I got the iPhone at the 4. You know, maybe I'll get the iPlane at 4S. You know what I'm saying?
I feel like those Apple Vision, once they like, I don't know, year 5, when they really shrink them down.
Oh, yeah.
Some potential there.
When they can be like my sunglasses, then we're cooking.
Yeah.
You know, I'll be pinching and pulling at the air, and I'll be feeling like Minority Report, but I'll look like I'm mad.
Yeah.
You know,
Great.
what are you tickling ghosts? What are you doing over there? You know, listen, I'm looking at dinosaurs. All right. Well, before we dive into this one, I want to give a huge, huge shout out to some of the task force members over at patreon.com/redweb. It is the #1 way to support this show now that we're independent. You get this podcast ad free. You get Movie Club, which, by the way, this Friday, very excited. We got Chopping Mall that we just recorded. Listen, we are really expanding the territory. We did so many good classics. Now it's time to do the crapics. And this was a fun time. Good 80s movies. So sign up patreon.com/redweb to get that bonus show called Movie Club. And we have a bunch of other juicy bonuses. Christian, your mom recorded some potential ghost evidence. We did Randonautica. We put a cake together one time. Lots of good stuff. But shout outs. We got Dookie. We got Goblin. We got Broman, Clint from PS3, Bewick, and Jarrett Osborne, to name a few. Thank you guys so much for supporting us. With that, Fredo, I think it's time to wind back the clock, take you back to January 1st, 1985. Are you flying this year? Are we past the threshold?
It seems like it's a good time past the threshold, I'll say.
Maybe this case will change your mind.
Oh, Lord.
Here we go. The Eastern Airlines Flight 980 took off from Asunción, Paraguay at about 5:57 p.m. local time. Now, Eastern Airlines EAL was an American airline headquartered out of Miami, Florida, and that, like I said, kind of shut down in 1991. A whole different story. The Boeing 727 that they were flying was bound for El Alto International Airport, just outside the administrative capital of La Paz, Bolivia. So they're kind of going through their admin capital on a way to their final destination up in Miami. All airlines kind of have a headquarters, right? Mm-hmm. Let's see. I think they were also going to stop through Ecuador, but as you know, the plane never made it to these other destinations. This aircraft was piloted by Lawrence Campbell, aka Larry, with his co-pilot Ken Rhodes and flight engineer Mark Bird. While the plane could carry up to 189 people, at this time there were financial strifes and other reasons that the plane only had 29 people on board, 19 of whom were passengers. The other 10 were flight crew members.
That's a lot of flight crew members.
It's a good amount of flight crew members. Maybe there's like a minimum despite the number of passengers, but yeah, it's a good amount. 3 in the cockpit, 7 kicking it with the drinks and peanuts. And maybe some also on their way to Deadhead to another airport, you know?
Yeah, that's a lot.
It is a lot.
Seems like a lot. Then again, there's not that many people on this flight.
Listen, you're going to get service. Like every person has half a flight attendant, or if I flip the ratio, every flight attendant only has 2 people-ish. So you're going to get some good attention.
Yeah, you are.
Now, at about 7:37 p.m., EAL Flight 980 contacted El Alto Air Traffic Control to request permission to begin their descent. So they're very close. They're on their way to descend and land at the airport. They were about 25 miles away from La Paz at that time, and they told the controller that they were about 10 minutes flight time out, estimating their arrival time to be 7:47 p.m. After the notice, they were then given permission to descend from their cruising altitude, or at that current time, they were 25,000 feet in the air, and they were given permission to come down to 18,000 feet and continue their descent into the airport. Now, this would be the last known communication with the flight crew. 10 minutes later, Flight 980 did not land at the estimated time and was nowhere to be seen. After several failed attempts by the ATC and other aircraft in the area to contact Flight 980 via radio, it was officially designated a distress phase, aka DETRESFA, or I've never heard of this term before, so I'm going to call it DETRESFA. But it's basically an acronym that refers to a distress phase, that there is imminent danger around a plane or something's gone wrong.
Oof.
Now, this was issued at 10:28 p.m. At this point, search and rescue began immediately. On January 3rd, roughly 20 hours after the plane was scheduled to land in La Paz, the plane was located by the Bolivian Air Force. Now, discovery was actually made possible because, as you're going to find out, it is in a remote location up in the mountains. So discovery was only made possible because parts of the fuselage and the wings could be seen as helicopters were flying around looking in the area. It appeared that Flight 980 had collided with Mount Illimani of the Andes mountain range, and just below the summit, in fact. So this would put the crash site at an altitude of 19,600 feet or 6 kilometers. So it's kind of at the level that it would have been flying, though admittedly, as we'll find out, Mount Illimani is actually just north of the planned flight route. Now, this mountain is quite tall. The peak is actually 21,100 feet, so it didn't really crash all that far away from its max height. And Flight 980, when found, was seen covered in snow on the southern slope of the mountain. The plane, as I kind of hinted, had deviated from the planned route by about 26 degrees to the right, aka north, in the direction that it was flying. Now, when seen, it was reported to have crashed nose first, and I think that would be based on the damages seen on the aircraft, though it's worth mentioning that at least one source that we read about claims that the plane actually hit the mountain belly first, as if it had kind of like pulled back and collided the stomach of the airplane into the mountain. Now, to give you an idea of the geography, in case you're not aware, this is in South America, and the mountain range, and this mountain in particular, is just southeast of La Paz. So I wanted to do a little bit of investigation here. My engineering mind kicked in, so I wanted to put some numbers together. Now, this isn't going to be fully accurate. It is a rough estimation based on numbers I could find, but as the crow flies, the distance between the summit of Mount Illimani and El Alto International Airport is about 45.5 kilometers or 28 miles. A Boeing 727, when it's descending, is flying anywhere between 450 and 515 knots. So, kind of putting this all together by my estimates, this puts the plane about 3-minute flight time outside of La Paz, meaning that this crash must have happened roughly 7 minutes after their call to air traffic control under these assumed standard operating conditions. Again, we don't know what happened, and spoiler alert, we never find the black box, and so we'll never figure out what really went down to bring this plane down. And we'll explore, like I said, all of those answers or all those theories. So that gives us 7 minutes of questionable what happened for theories to kind of derive from.
That's different from the, like, I guess, like the danger call or danger status that was given to the flight?
Yeah, so that was issued when the plane didn't arrive. So
Right.
air traffic control is like, listen, they're supposed to be here by now based on our last communications. But it wasn't really until 10:28 that it was given the distress phase acknowledgement because, again, they kept trying to hail them. Other planes in the area were also calling out for Flight 980, and they weren't getting word back. And so at that point, they're going, listen, they should have been here. We
Right.
can't get a hold of them. It's been a few hours. Let's go find them. Something has gone wrong for sure.
Oof.
Yeah, very, very scary. So that is the timeline that we know of the crash, of the plane going missing, and things of that nature. But this is where the investigation phase comes in because, again, we have no answers and we've only just now supposedly found the location of the crash. Now let's dig in and figure out what happened as best as we can. And this investigation spans years, if not decades. I mean, in 2016, a couple of friends decided to go investigate it themselves. So that's how long it's been ongoing.
But, like, what is that, what is that going to do, really?
I think really it's just going to cause the case to close, right? You want some answers, you want closure, and the real search is for the black box, which we'll talk more about it. If you don't know what a black box is, I'll describe it a little bit later on, but it basically contains all of those answers in a protected box, and it just offers closure. It prevents any future issues of this caliber. If there's any sort of tech issues, mechanical issues, they can know so they can better improve other airplanes so they don't have those issues. But if it was like pilot error though, then at least you know that, and you know that there's nothing really mechanically to work on.
Yeah, but I guess, like, what makes them qualified to do that,
Oh, that's a very good question.
Do they have, like, a journalistic background? Did they have experience in aviation?
That's a very good question.
Because otherwise, like if like you have some experience in engineering, but if a plane like went down and Christian and I just decided to investigate, like we're not qualified in any way. And in matter of fact, we're probably putting ourselves in danger.
Very much putting yourselves in danger, especially in this case.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to jump to them too much because a lot happens before them.
Interesting.
But Christian, if you don't mind, I definitely want to earmark that question so when we get to it, we can kind of approach it because there are two factors in my mind that kind of bring them to this case. But please look into that as I kind of roll back the clock to the beginning of the investigation. But let's not forget that. All right, so multiple government agencies were involved in the response to this crash, including the U.S. National Transport Safety Board, the NTSB. We'll talk about them a little bit throughout here. But of course, this is an international flight with an American company, so a lot of countries involved. And of course, that brings in Bolivia as well as the Paraguayan government's agencies. And this complicated matters a little bit because, like I said, you have 3 countries involved. And there's some drama. Attempts were made by search and rescue teams to reach and investigate the crash site a few days after the crash. But as we've seen in so many cases, especially in the mountains, at altitude, with cold weather and snowy weather conditions, they just weren't able to do it easily. There was a lot of snow. It was below zero, in fact. And the winds were up to 60 miles an hour, and that made it incredibly difficult at 19,000 feet.
Yeah.
And according to the Associated Press, there was 3 feet of snow that had fallen on the mountain just in that week alone, let alone what already existed there. So immediately after the crash, evidence is being buried and moved, and because snow melts and shifts. And again, we've seen this before in Dyatlov Pass, Kamar Daban, the Chivrai incident, where the investigation has to be delayed because it's so hard to get to or unsafe.
Yeah, and that's why for me, going back to the friends, I'm like, oh man, they could easily be putting themselves in danger.
Absolutely.
And it's just like, it doesn't seem like an easy thing to just go and investigate.
Right. It certainly isn't. Your instinct is totally accurate, which is, I think, all the more reason why I definitely want to look into that question, because if you're not qualified, this is a heck of a thing to go diving into.
Yeah.
And especially if you're not sure if you're going to go finding anything. But we'll get into their findings in a wee bit. Now, this is where some of the drama comes in. Officials in Peru offered their helicopters to get to the site, but the Bolivian government denied their offer, and this is where we don't know everything, but reportedly, they just didn't want to look bad in comparison to Peru because this is on their soil, and so they're saying, listen, I get it, I appreciate it. They push that little post-it note with the number back across the negotiating table, and they say, we'll do it ourselves, you're going to make us look bad. But again, that's kind of as rumor has it.
It's rumor, but stuff like that does happen. Like, it's so weird how authorities get really up in arms about jurisdiction and stuff.
Yeah, and I get it to an extent, but I'm also like, when human lives are on the matter,
yeah.
Listen, we'll get into that part too, and that's where some of the conspiracy comes from, but this is laying the groundwork for some of the conspiracy. Why didn't Bolivia want other eyes in here? Did they want to kind of keep charge of it? Is it jurisdiction-based? Is it drama-based? Is it disagreements-based between the governments? It leaves a lot of open-ended questions that theories and conspiracies thrive on. But to me, I'm like, listen, if danger is happening, or if there are potential future mechanical issues we need to resolve, let's just get all the help in. Let's call the A-team. The Avengers need to get in here,
Yeah, let's get the best of the best.
Let's assemble. Now, eventually, a notable Bolivian mountain climber named Bernardo Guarachi reached the crash site on January 5th. And when he returned, he said that the plane had, quote, exploded on impact, end quote, and that there were no survivors. He himself at the site could not find the black box necessary to determine the cause of the crash. Black boxes are also known as flight recorders. They record all the cockpit conversations, all the sounds, the inputs from the pilot, co-pilot, and everything, all the parameters of the plane, its sensing, the speed, the altitude, the pressures. And they are also covered in a very strong, bright orange encasing, so that way it's resistant to damage and fire, and also a little bit easier to be found. And according to the Associated Press, he also suggested that search efforts cease until the end of the rainy season, as far back as May, a patient 4 months later. And again, this is from a seasoned mountain climber saying, listen, I know that you want to go up there. I didn't see much other than an exploded plane. I think you got to wait until it's safer in May.
Damn.
Yeah.
It's like not much faith that anyone survived,
Right. I mean, if it collided at speed, very unlikely. If it looked like it exploded on impact, just as unlikely. And then if anyone did survive, I would say it would be almost unfortunate, just given the inhospitable weather and altitude. It would be a very painful death after the whole thing.
Yeah. It just seems like the focus is very much on like, hey, let's just try to figure out what happened. Not like we got lives to save, possibly.
Yes, exactly. So interestingly, another fuel for the conspiracies is that it's unclear who actually hired Guarachi to climb this mountain, if anyone did. Maybe he did it on his own. We don't exactly know, and this is according to Outside Magazine. Search efforts were then eventually called off a week after the crash, though U.S. Air Force helicopters continued to search exclusively for that black box. Of course, it being an American company, they really wanted answers and wanted to make sure that future flights were safe for anybody else taking a 727 in similar conditions. That said, later attempts proved difficult, despite the weather changing and everything, due to simply it being at a high elevation. NTSB members struggled to physically climb to the crash site and search it due to that altitude. They were falling prey to altitude sickness of all things. And that's when there's a lack of oxygen, which has just a hellish array of negative symptoms on the body. Organ failure, and just like, if you don't have oxygen, your body literally starts to decay.
Yeah. It's rough because you want conclusions, right? But this is the type of mystery where I just go, I don't know, man. I feel like we're putting even more people at risk here.
Definitely. I think that's the push-pull here. And honestly, let me be super clear about altitude sickness. It doesn't have to be so dramatic. It also causes nausea, vomiting, headaches, dizziness, fatigue, poor coordination, so people can put themselves in further danger and also not fully understand the stakes that they're working with. But that aside, I mean, yes, it does seem that, is it worth it to find the answer? I don't know, but I think this mystery really lives in the conspiracies because the difficult nature of the location to properly investigate just leaves so many holes for some interesting, some pretty wild conspiracies to come to the table. And I think that's really where we're going to kind of explore the intrigue around this, because I'm with you. This feels like very unfortunate. I do want to future-proof our tech and our planes and things, but I also think that it's going to endanger more than it's going to help if we just keep pushing at it.
Yeah.
In March, 2 months after the crash, EAL flight engineer Ray Valdez organized his own climb to the crash site. Ironically, Valdez was actually originally meant to be on that flight, and this actually reminds me of the Titanic conspiracy, which I'll talk about maybe more in the theories, but people that were meant to be on the flight that then suddenly weren't. Only fuel for the fire, right?
Yep.
But Valdez's team actually reached the crash site, and they themselves could also not find the black box, but they noted a few interesting things: the lack of bodies and the lack of blood. It's also worth noting that no bodies were ever officially recovered from the crash site, and some sources claim that no blood was ever found, even beyond Valdez's team. Which, again, I'm just laying the groundwork for with all these conspiracies are kind of growing out of.
I mean, but like such a huge crash and like the location and positioning it's in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess it'd be difficult to find bodies still.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be like animals got to them or if they burned. You would think that maybe some bones or some evidence would be left behind.
Yeah.
But the fact that there seems to be, on record anyway, none, it's what kept people so curious about this case. They're going, there's something else happening here. What is that something else? And I'm not saying that that's the case, just saying that that's why it's on people's mind.
It's just like a very unusual little detail.
Yeah. But also people think the lack of people on the plane were an unusual detail too. So,
True.
I
mean, I've been on planes where it's just like, oh, I guess this is a really weird day and hour to fly and it's not packed at all.
Yeah. Everyone gets their own row. You distribute everybody for the weight and spread out, Now, in September of 1985, later that same year, the Bolivian Aircraft Accident and Investigation Committee released their findings. And this is where I put a lot of stake. Personally, this is my opinion, but I want to hear what you think. They concluded that the crash could have been caused by a deviation from the flight path, possibly as a result of operational failure exacerbated by adverse weather conditions. And to kind of a little bit agree with that, and if not build on it with a little bit more detail, many aviation experts actually conclude a similar cause. They say, quote, controlled flight into the terrain, aka CFIT. Though without the flight data, this particular theory remains inconclusive, albeit widely accepted. So all that is to say is pilot error combined with the unique environment of landing at La Paz. It's a difficult place, high altitude mountains in the area. So, they were descending to 18,000 feet and they have mountains nearby just off course that are 2,000 feet taller than that. It is entirely possible that if they drifted off course for whatever reason, weather or what have you, that they might not have known, they might not have been aware. And so unfortunately, a crash.
Yeah, it was just a big surprise.
Yeah.
That's a strong theory.
Mm-hmm.
Because you take a look at it, like previous information about how they kind of went dark a little bit before they were supposed to land. And so you'd think there's malfunctions with like the communication, which is adjacent to, controls and anything, that is in the cockpit. And then from there, you're flying completely blind. And it's not far-fetched at all to think that a whole array of mountains just snuck up on you.
I mean, that's entirely possible. People then go, okay, cool. That does make sense. But, and again, they strap on that tinfoil hat real tight, 2 sizes too small. And they go, but why? What's the why or the how behind that? Okay, well, let's calm down. But interestingly, again, what added fuel to this fire was that this official investigation document does make note of the lack of bodies, the lack of blood at the crash site, but it also recognizes the inaccessibility of the location. This then, coming from an official source, means it must be conspiracy. But I'm very excited to talk about that. But before we do, a few more investigation efforts happened, and of course, we're going to get to those friends.
This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Marvel Snap. I could not be happier that Red Web is partnering with Marvel Snap because this is one of my favorite games as of late. I have hundreds of hours in this game. I've ranked in the top of the leaderboards in this game season after season. I've collected all the best card arts. It's amazing. Marvel Snap is an award-winning collectible card game that combines deep strategy, a unique snapping mechanic, your favorite Marvel characters, and thousands of unique card art variants created by renowned artists to collect and use. I read comic books every single night. I mention comics and reference comics in episodes all the time. And so I couldn't be happier to be working with Marvel Snap. Marvel Snap is full of fast-paced matches with each game only taking 3 minutes. That's the big thing there. And both players get to play at the exact same time. New cards are released every week, new seasons every month, and frequent events keep the game fresh and exciting. It's a great time. It's fun. It's fast. The card art is absolutely gorgeous. You have artists like Peach Momoko, who just has beautiful art in general, and you get to actually play the art, upgrade the art. The art is like 3D in the game. It's beautiful. Download the Marvel Snap app now, available on the App Store, Google Play, and Steam, or visit marvelsnap.com to learn more. Or visit our link in the description to let them know we sent you.
This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Rocket Money. Did you know that over 74% of people have subscriptions that they've forgotten about? Well, with Rocket Money, you don't have to ever remember all those subscriptions that are dripping and dropping through your inbox and through your wallet. You don't have to worry about forgetting any of that because you can see them all laid out right in front of you. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. See all of your subscriptions in one convenient place and know exactly where your money is going. For any you don't want anymore, Rocket Money is going to step in. They're going to help you cancel them for you with just a few taps. Rocket Money will even try to negotiate your bills for you so they can lower those and sometimes lower them up to 20%. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/redweb. That's rocketmoney.com/redweb. rocketmoney.com/redweb. So the NTSB attempted once again, 1 month later in October of 1985, but this climb went so badly, multiple people had to quit partway through. Those who did make it to the site, again, did not find the black box. In 2006, now over 20 years later, a group of climbers came across the crash site. I don't know, this sounds like it must have been inadvertent, but they were climbing along and they found it, and it was still covered in ice and snow. And you have climber Roberto Gomez, who told New York Times that he actually found photographs, some children's clothing, and pieces of the fuselage. They were able to find these items because due to climate shifts, there was some snow melt, some glacial melt in the area, which exposed new things. So 20 years later or so, they were able to be found, I guess. Otherwise, they must have been buried in the snow in the weeks and so on since the initial investigations.
I didn't even think about like climate change playing a part here, but yeah, revealing more because it's just warmer every year.
Yeah. Or maybe, I don't know if 2006 was the year of El Nino or La Nina, and, you have a warmer year on record. And so climate change trends plus like unique one-off years that things get melted and moved. And I guess this group stumbled into this. But this is where we find 31 years after the crash in 2016, two American friends enter the picture. You have Dan Futrell and Isaac Stoner. And they decided they wanted to reach the crash site and try to find the black box after they read about the story on none other than Wikipedia.
Oh.
And this is where, this is where I want to open the floor to Christian to see, before we really dissect kind of their findings and their experience, do you have any more context for like, were they climbers? Were they just kind of interested, or did they have aviation experience? Like, what's going on with these guys?
Yeah, from what I could find, I found a bit of information on Futrell, not so much on Stoner, other than the fact they were former roommates and friends, but they're athletes, they're climbing enthusiasts, they're, I don't want to say adrenaline junkies, but they're interested in, finding adventure, basically. And
okay,
that's basically it. They were looking for things to do. They were initially reading about Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, which kind of led them down a rabbit hole, which led them to Flight 980, and they just took it upon themselves. They were interested and wanted to go find it.
So they were treating it kind of like a side quest. They're like, I like climbing, but this one has a goal.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, but they've had some experience, I guess,
Yeah.
Yeah, and they took it seriously. They trained to try to acclimate themselves to the conditions that were going to be present there. Like they got an altitude tent so they could try to get used to what the conditions would be like at those altitudes before they traveled. So they took it seriously.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they're really nothing more than enthusiasts, it seems like.
I mean, honestly, most of the stuff we know about this case and the crash site come from experienced mountain climbers, and who other than them to know how to treat the altitude with respect and the efforts you need to get there, you know what I mean?
Man, as like exciting or not exciting it would be to just be randomly hiking and come across anything, I just wouldn't want it. Just wouldn't want to deal with it. Having to like, if we're just in a hiking trip and then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, there's plane crash or a recently charred vehicle or something, just like, or like a bag we just randomly tripped on. I don't want to deal with having to like get back to civilization, making a phone call, leading the police over there.
Yeah, you know what? That's a good point.
It's work. It's actually work.
Tons of work. And they kind of know what they're getting into a little bit. But yeah, if you stumble into something, you don't want to stumble into opening Pandora's box.
Right.
Because then you're like, oh man, I don't want to like not do it. I don't want to just leave it there. But also like, oh man, now you're like wrapped into it. What did you see? What happened there? What did you touch? Take us back.
Yeah. I wouldn't be able to just leave it, essentially. I'd have to, alert somebody.
Yep. I'd say, listen, with all due respect, I want to try to minimize my involvement here. There's a lot happening. I saw this. You're the experts. Bye. All right. Well, with that, let's talk about their experience. So they recorded all of their efforts in a blog called Operation Thonapa, and Outside Magazine's Peter Frick Wright joined them to document the climb. Once they reached the crash site on January 4th, 2017, Futrell and Stoner were able to find, for the first time it seems, human remains, like bones, a promising magnetic tape recording, and bright orange material, which would suggest the remnants of a black box. These are the three images I have for you now. And Task Force, as always, on our social media or our YouTube upload of this, will give you the three images, kind of scan through those.
All right, I'll look through the first one, or both the image A.
Yeah.
Whoa. Dude, that's like the turbine of the plane. It's just sitting up there.
Mm-hmm. It's wild to see that.
Yeah, both. It's cold as hell, but I'm not seeing a lot of snow at all, so it's probably all melted.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just sitting next to it, taking a picture.
Yeah.
And yeah, there it is. Wow, man. And then looking at the second photo, yeah, look at them. They've just found a bunch of stuff up there.
Yeah. I'm absolutely blown away that they were able to find human remains, things like the magnetic tape, especially what could be remains of the black box, because So many other people, yes, tried and failed, but some people did make it to the crash site and literally reported the absence of all of these things. And so I love that they got together this well-documented effort, and maybe they didn't find anything, but in this case, they found quite a bit.
So was it just all snowed over and they just so happened, because I mean, this is all at the crash site.
It could be. And then the third image there is actually almost like an evidence image, just showing the pieces of that bright orange material, some of the magnetic tape, and then a piece of ruler for scale. Now, around the crash site, in addition to a few of these things, they also found what appeared to be crocodile and snake skins, which would have been considered contraband, I believe, both at that time and currently. There are various laws that went into effect in 1973 regarding fauna and flora and the trade of those things, endangered animals and everything. So, again, contraband being on the plane, fuel to the fire of conspiracies, but these friends gave everything they recovered to the NTSB, and in February of 2017, the NTSB released some of their findings. So after looking at these for a few weeks, the NTSB concluded that the orange fragments were from the cockpit voice recorder rack and the flight data recorder pressurized container assembly, neither of which unfortunately contained any data, but it is as close to the black box as we have seen, and it just seems to indicate that the black box itself maybe was just completely obliterated, and this is evidence to that.
That's such a wild find.
It's a very wild find.
Like, to actually find something. Like, yeah, I mean, it first started off as like two friends. I'm like, okay, maybe not, but no, they did their due diligence and they actually came up with stuff.
I cannot imagine the dopamine hit of being like, oh my God, I think I found something that we've been looking for over 30 years at this crash site.
Right.
Maybe we can get some answers. But then obviously the deflation when you realize, well, it's part of that, but unfortunately it doesn't give us much. And unfortunately the quote promising tape recording, or that magnetic strip that they had, was actually a recording of an episode of I Spy, a TV show from the 60s. So, there you go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's how they used to bootleg. They used to fly these tapes around and say, listen, I want to watch the show, but I don't want to pay for cable. Fly it up from Asunción, Paraguay.
Just like heavy bootleg system going down.
But yeah, that is kind of the modern conclusion to the investigation. I love that they went and did this. Wow. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, we have like modern day photos and everything. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming they just went back up there and just recovered everything.
I think as much as they could, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really cool to see the plane engine. It gives object permanence to the crash. It's in a kind of darkly fascinating way. It's nice to see the location because it creates a reality around this mystery where people were lost and questions were had, but answers were never given. And so in some way you feel closer to an answer, or there's some sort of closure there. But with that, it seems like it was such a simple and straightforward case. And as I've hinted throughout this entire episode, this crash became a lot more intriguing when you started to look at what wasn't answered, the theories that surround the case. And we're going to start with two that are more common theories that answer what might be happening here. And then, of course, three that get into more conspiratorial realms that try to connect a few dots, especially at the government level. People love their government conspiracies. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Privacy Hawk. Having your data exposed can be pretty scary. Knowing your private information is out there floating around for anyone to access or buy leads to serious safety concerns and privacy violations. Privacy Hawk's free scan searches thousands of websites and databases to show you who has your data and helps you take action. Your personal information can be on more than 80 different sites at any given time, including people search sites, places you likely didn't know even existed, and Privacy Hawk sends formal requests on your behalf to data brokers so your information isn't shared or sold even further. The Platinum plan gives you extra protection like dark web alerts and data breach monitoring, so you know right away if your data is exposed. I actually use Privacy Hawk in my own life. I like to collect my data and keep it to myself. You know what I'm saying? I got drawers full of my own paperwork, but that's not for anybody else. And Privacy Hawk is super, super easy. You put in the information about yourself and they scan all these websites, they show them to you, and then you know where it is in the process of them requesting it to be taken down. And then they show you all the websites where it has been taken down. I really appreciate the service, and it's something I'm going to use for years to come. See where your data is exposed and take steps to stay safe online and protect your privacy. Download the app, get a free privacy scan, and use code RED20, RED20, for a special price on the Privacy Hawk Platinum subscription. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Built Rewards. Listen up, all my renters of the task force. Ever feel like you're stuck in a loop with rent payments, just watching your money vanish into thin air? It's time to turn that rent game around and start earning some serious rewards, and that is where Built Rewards come in. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent. Every month, pay your rent and watch the Built points roll in. Use your points to jet off on a dream vacation. Put your points towards a flight or hotel stay with 500 plus airlines and 700,000 plus hotels and properties. You can also use your points to book fitness studio classes, redeem them toward a future rent payment. They're designed to meet your lifestyle. Pay rent hassle-free through the Built Rewards app. Your rent game just got a major upgrade. Built Rewards have been consistently ranked the highest value point currency by the Points Guy and Bankrate. Earn points by paying rent right now by going to joinbuilt.com/redweb. That's JOINBILT.com/redweb. Make sure to use our URL to let them know we sent you. Joinbuilt.com/redweb to start earning points with your rent payments today. And spend those points the way you deserve. So, with that, we'll talk about theory number 1. Was there a malfunction? Flight 980 may have crashed due to some kind of malfunction with the plane. After all, the crash site lines up with mostly expected flight paths. It's not too far off. And the altitude from the final communications is similar to what we see, at least at the crash site. So it does seem like almost standard operation minus the last minute veer off course. Now, of course, this is pretty straightforward, but the leading wrinkle in this theory comes from the fact that EAL inspected the plane less than 2 weeks before the flight. Ironically, it was inspected on December 20th, 1984, so just like I think a week and a half later, maybe about 2 weeks, this plane was flying. Everything was said to be good, right? It was deeply inspected. But that said, right, it's not impossible that something could have been overlooked. It's not impossible that something could break in the time that it was inspected to then flying. As we know, even in modern times, we see modern major malfunctions. You know, the emergency door ripping off an aircraft and depressurizing the entire cabin. We've seen wild things even in 2024. So just because it goes through all the checks and balances doesn't always mean that it is 100% secure and sanctioned to fly.
Exactly. Things happen. Accidents happen. It's accident for a reason.
Yep. So like I said, if you're stepping onto a plane,
oh man, this
is all very rare stuff.
This is a very rare thing. Don't worry about it.
Just keep playing Furiosa. You're good. You're almost finished.
Totally fine.
Wait, I don't know why you're watching Furiosa and listening to this.
Yeah, I was like, that's a
very confusing experience.
That's a very precise movie to like nail in there.
Well, you know, you were deciding between Blade Runner 2048. Mm-hmm. Is it 2049?
2049.
Listen, you didn't look long enough. You clicked on Furiosa. See? I'm really inserting my own experience here. Okay. Then the next theory is pretty common and one that stands out a lot to me, and that centers around weather. The flight may have crashed simply due to weather conditions coupled with the potential inexperience of the pilots. The El Alto International Airport is the highest altitude airport in the world. It sits at 13,325 feet, or just over 4 kilometers. So flying conditions are a little different. They have very long runways because at that altitude, getting lift, when your flaps are set, etc. A lot of mechanical reasons for it, but the air is thinner. And so the flight mechanics and everything that you're used to at ground level, sea level, or normal average airports are different here. So planes have to land at higher speeds compared to the lower altitudes, longer runways, as I said. You're also flying up and over mountains to avoid things, and weather conditions to boot. And what makes it even tougher is honestly, we have to remember that this is the 1980s, and El Alto air traffic controllers did not have radar at this time, so they themselves could not help really guide the plane visually. They would have to see it physically to guide it if they knew where it was coming from. So they honestly didn't know if it was going off course, when it was going off course, or to say, hey, the weather in this area is XYZ. So they're flying a little bit more blind, but I do believe by this point, this airport has radar, but it depends. I wanted to look into this just as like the aviation geek I am. I think by this point, maybe even the 60s, the United States had full radar coverage at most consumer level airports, But across the world, they were coming online at varying different times, just due to cost, availability, things of that nature.
I mean, there's 2 pilots, right? So,
Yes.
I mean, you think you'd pair one experienced one or pilot with like a maybe fresher pilot?
Yeah. And honestly, Christian, I'd be very curious if you wouldn't mind helping look into their experience, because we saw that in some of the sources and you want to take it for face value. But I'm very curious. Yeah. To your point, Fredo, if we look a little deeper, were both of them inexperienced? That would definitely be a mistake. Because, yeah, you want to do a little bit of like understudy, a little training.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'll let Christian kind of click away on that. But this then comes back to the weather conditions. As we know, the week after the crash, weather was pretty harsh. So it's possible that the plane crashed itself due to that very same difficult weather that was going on. And maybe, in fact, they were trying to evade the weather, and that's where, unfortunately, they either didn't know, didn't think about, or whatever, the presence of the Andes Mountains right there, and Mount Illimani kind of snuck up on them. Now, that particular night, we did kind of look back, according to ABC News anyway, and it did seem to be quite cloudy. There was thunderstorms in the area, and this could limit visibility, especially at the altitude that they're flying. And so if they're trying to avoid turbulence, you don't want to go flying directly through a cumulonimbus. If you can avoid it, you tend to kind of fly left and right to dodge those things. And so that could have been part of what they were doing. Just standard operation, fly around this big cloud, come around for a landing, and Bob's your uncle. Because it's Mount Illimani, tall mountain, and it's up there. It's just incredible to think about something being at your altitude where you're flying.
Yeah.
I just don't even know how to process that, flying by at 20,000 feet and seeing the tip of a mountain go by higher than you. That's hard to comprehend.
It's a little weird. It's a little weird. You just never want to be that close to anything.
Oh.
You know what I mean? Going that fast.
Absolutely not. And honestly, that is not standard. They have ground radars.
Yeah.
Usually they have sensors, so they know where the geography is. You're never flying that close to a mountain. But again, we're in weird circumstances.
But I mean, I've been on a plane within the last year where the pilot was just kind of casual, like, oh yeah, we had to add another 20 minutes to our landing because there was another plane that was a little bit off their course and they're kind of heading towards our direction. And I was like, okay, well, it was a casual way of saying that.
Right.
Again, if you're listening to this on a plane, sorry.
Dude, and if you're listening to this on a plane, go ahead and blink your ears for just like 30 more seconds, because literally a few days ago, there was a Cessna flying around Austin airspace and it almost collided. It came within, again, keep your ears blinked, 300 feet
What?
of a commercial airline flying northwest.
That's
And
hella close.
hella close. And they moved, obviously they saw it last minute, but they moved to adjust and almost went towards another commercial airline because, of course,
Oh my God, how tight is the airspace?
it's surprisingly tight, especially around a city where you have flight lanes and you have landing lanes. So
Yeah.
somebody was way out of a lane, and that's what threw it all off. Because otherwise, it's a well-oiled machine, very calculated, very stressful. I gotta give huge props, huge respect to air traffic controllers out there. I had a friend of mine who wanted to go do that. It's a well-paying job because it is one of the most stressful jobs in the world. It is just a lot, and you have long hours with little sleep. So big props to the ATC out there. But yeah, I mean, it can get hairy. I don't want to put the fear in people because flying is traditionally very safe. But again, we're talking about extenuating circumstances. We're talking about flight errors. We're talking about pilot errors, malfunctions, weather, a lot of these things kind of combining. Now, coming back to this theory, it is said that maybe evading weather might make sense since the flight did go off course, like I was talking about. And complicating the matters, the pilot, Larry Campbell, had only flown to El Alto once before. So even if he did have experience, as Christian might speak to in a second, again, this is a very unique airport, and coming in and out of it requires a little bit of extra experience just because of the unique circumstances. And landing at this altitude maybe created, combined with the weather, created the dire circumstances they unfortunately found themselves in.
Yeah, I think it was just a combination of it being a dangerous lane to fly in, along with some malfunctions. Mm-hmm. It was just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and not to mention, again, to reiterate, it's nighttime. And so you do have instruments. A lot of people can fly at night exclusively by their instruments, but if you have any sort of malfunction, we talked about this a lot in the Bermuda Triangle episode, flying at night, if you're trusting your instruments and they're not working properly, that is a recipe for disaster if you can't trust your eyes,
It's very true. I would assume that more and more nowadays, pilots are relying heavily on their instruments because they do a lot. I mean, granted, pilots do a lot, but they've been automating things more and more as the years go by.
Yeah. I mean, there is a light wrinkle to this theory as we kind of close this one out, but I agree. I think a lot of planes do rely on their tech and their autopilot. You know, there's a lot going on in the cockpit, and there's a lot of redundancy built in because of situations like this. But the main wrinkle comes in where we talk about the air traffic control and their records, and they don't really make any mention of the conditions that may have affected the flight that night. So again, we're talking about ABC News. We're looking back on some sources, but air traffic didn't really note that down, and so it could be accurate. This doesn't mean the conditions were clear. It just means that there is a little room for unknown.
Before we move on to the next theory, I was able to find a little bit more information about Campbell's experience and the other pilot's experience. Unfortunately, not really finding anything on the co-pilot and whether or not he had done that flight before, but it does seem like when a pilot is new to a route, they will have something called a check pilot, who's somebody who's flown the route before, and they will ride in the cockpit. There was a check pilot on this flight, a check captain. He was aboard the plane, but for some reason, I don't know why, he was in first class. So it may have been a case where he was there in the cockpit for the first flight, everything went fine, so he wasn't ordered to be in the cockpit, but that's all I can really find on that. No information, like I said, on the co-pilot or anyone else on the crew.
That's unfortunate because I feel like for this leg, it's the landing that he needed to be there for.
Right. I felt like you could chill for the most of it until then.
Well, as you know, it's these lack of answers, this lack of uncertainty that lays the groundwork for conspiracy. So I almost wanted to tease at the top, what does an air crash have to do with assassination attempts and drug money? Well, now you're about to explore it.
Wait, what?
Yeah, we're getting into it now. Many people believe various conspiracies were involved in Flight 980's crash. For example, again, Bolivia was hindering Peru's help with helicopters. They relied on climbers in tough conditions, and some of the climbers had unknown motivations or employers, so these are some of the nuggets people are working with. And on top of that, the lack of bodies, and especially the missing black box, makes some people believe that maybe they were up to no good, and maybe the black box was found and tucked away, hidden safely, and maybe the bodies were also scrubbed so that way no evidence could be found against whatever these nefarious deeds might have been. And again, I'm waxing poetic about conspiracy. This is not fact.
Yeah, this is a heavy conspiracy, but I mean, that's what conspiracies are for, right?
Right, and this is all entertainment.
It's where it gets wild.
Exactly. So it's all entertainment purposes here, but it is interesting. You know me, I always like to explore what's possible through the lens of what's practical. So let's talk about that first conspiracy. There is a theory that the flight was intended to crash in order to assassinate one of the members on board. One of the passengers, Marion Davis, was the wife of the U.S. ambassador to Paraguay, Arthur Davis. Interestingly, the ambassador decided not to go on this trip just a few days before the flight. This is the second person who opted out of the flight last minute. And this, again, is where I'd hint towards the Titanic conspiracy, where there was a theory that J.P. Morgan, who had a heavy investment in the Titanic, part of this grand insurance scheme, he had a suite on the Titanic until last minute. He said, no, I don't want to go anymore. And he stayed in Paris for a few more days. And so when you start doing stuff like that, people start to go, then you must have been up to something, huh?
Yeah.
You were doing it.
You were doing something. There was an insurance claim here somewhere. I know it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Alternatively, and this is wild that there is 2 or 3 assassination targets on this plane. I don't know. But there's another target for this theory, and it is the director of the Peace Corps in Paraguay, William Kelly, who was on board that day. Not much else to say about it, but if someone were to take out or want to take this person out, crashing this plane, I guess, would be one way to do that. The third commonly theorized target is businessman Enrique Matalon. So the Matalones were a prolific and wealthy family, and Enrique's entire family, unfortunately, was on board this plane. This included himself, his wife, and his 3 children. And we know that some children's clothing was found by some climbers investigating the site. I believe that was in 2006 when those climbers stumbled across it. So the head of the family here was said to be carrying $20 million with him, and at the time, he would have been the richest person in Paraguay. So some believe that the Paraguayan mafia blew the plane up, took it out of the sky, what have you, as some sort of revenge plot, etc. These things unwind in a totally different direction, but suffice to say, this would have been the theoretical target, and that taking him out and taking out his entire family was some sort of mafia-centered plot.
Oh.
Why exactly the assassination had to take place in the plane, though, on this flight in particular,
Yeah.
with multiple external casualties, that's the unknown.
That seems a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
And also, How do you get rich off of that? How do you benefit off of that?
I don't know. You get rid of the money guy who was stifling your scheme. I don't know. I'm making things up. Here's the thing. You just committed an international crime on international soil with a U.S. plane. You're involving too many governments if you're trying to assassinate this way. That's my personal wrinkle on this theory.
Yeah, same.
Could you do it? Yeah. Could you also poison someone?
Yeah.
Get an ice bullet? I don't know.
Right. Drive-by, shooting, anything else that's simpler.
A fall down a flight of stairs.
Onto some bullets.
But that is one of the conspiracies. And this leads us, this has a lot more information than I would have expected. But the second angle to the conspiracy theory is drug trafficking. It's possible that Flight 980 was carrying a shipment of drugs, specifically cocaine. At the time of the crash, the idea that EAL flights were moving drugs was only a rumor, but it did exist. However, in 1986, the year after the crash, 22 EAL baggage handlers were indicted for drug trafficking. It was revealed that they had been delivering 300 pounds of cocaine to Miami weekly for 3 years, which does span 1985 that we're talking about.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, okay. There you go. If we have drugs involved, then I can see, bad people getting involved.
Right. And to kind of build on that, it doesn't necessarily say like, okay, this is why the plane crashed, but it might explain why the governments felt a little more cagey, or it might explain why they made a lot of efforts during dangerous times to investigate thoroughly, but not let the public know, therefore leaving a lot of clues despite the ongoing efforts. Basically like, okay, listen, if this is some sort of international crime and we're figuring that like a big drug bust, maybe people were getting paid off to look the other way. That's another way to think about it, but it's wild.
God, just the thing about this damn show, just when I go, I don't think there's any like mobster play involved. I'm like, well, there was drugs. I'm like, damn.
And you went, I believe it.
Okay, I'm locked into this one.
Anything's possible. Now, as part of this theory, you have former EAL pilot and author John Jen, who hypothesized that a bomb went off inside the plane, creating a hole in the fuselage, which then quickly depressurized it, caused the crash, etc. This would explain the, quote, exploded on impact appearance and the lack of bodies because they would have been sucked out of the plane prior to crashing. He went on to suggest that Guarachi was hired to get rid of the black box and any other evidence, so this was the first climber who found the site. Jen then argued in his book, Final Destination, that maybe the investigation was bad on purpose because of the drug movement under President Ronald Reagan. Interestingly, according to Outside Magazine, William Kelly's wife, Judith, was able to reach the crash site in 1985 with Guarachi after 3 months of training. She brought memorials and letters from herself and other victims' families.
Oh.
And so people look at that and say, well, if she could do it with a little training, was it really difficult to get to? I would say yeah. As someone who hasn't climbed a mountain, maybe.
Yeah.
But still.
Look, little to no training is still training.
3 months of strict training.
I mean, come on, that's a little bit of training.
Can't scoff at that.
3 months straight? Come on now.
She told EAL and American news outlets that there was no reason professionals could not have done the same, i.e., if I can get there, others can get there. And maybe she's just a badass. I don't know. But it is worth pointing out that it appears that the Bolivia's search and rescue agencies never made their own attempt to reach the crash site, which is kind of a orangey red flag. But back to Guarachi, Outside Magazine was able to get his story in 2016. He claimed that he was hired by a U.S. Embassy member, Ray Fike, who was in one of the searches. Guarachi saw footprints that seemed to have followed him up the mountain but didn't quite reach the top. And when he returned, he claimed that he was detained by the Bolivian government, who searched his bags and then interrogated him. So there's only more intrigue coming out in 2016 regarding the guy who first went to the site. Was he involved in the cover-up? Was he being spied on as he went to the site? Does this have anything to do with the drug plot and the drug money? Was it a cover-up? I don't know. But of course, in the theories, only more intrigue can possibly happen and more question marks, and it's so frustrating. But it is interesting.
Yeah, that's the thing about theories, man. There's just so many different angles that gets brought up.
Yeah.
Even though I would say a good size of them are like just very small theories.
Yeah.
It still makes you think and wonder.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it's just like, new angles you never really thought of, and then you start combining angles of what if it was this and this together. I don't know. It's juicy. It's gossip.
It's juicy little gossip. And that's what I think I love about some of these theories is indulging in the wild possible theories. Of course, it gets a little hairy when people's lives are involved. But yeah, I mean, honestly, the more you start looking at certain theories, you go, oh, that seems silly. But then we get into it and you're like, hold on a minute.
Yep.
Am I losing my marbles?
So many times there's theories I'm like, nah. And then with every sentence that you say, I go, okay, hold on now.
I might be convinced. Yeah. The biggest wrinkle left in this particular theory, and in fact, with regard to Jen's theory, is that the NTSB did say that this explosion that supposedly happened on this plane could have only happened after the crash or because of the crash. And so the idea that, everybody was decompressed and thrown from the plane before the crash, or that the explosion happened in the air and caused the crash, that kind of becomes tumultuous. But again, who knows? It seems that there are going to be forever some unresolved questions, some undiscovered evidence, and I think that that's just center to the truth for Flight 980. I wonder if we'll ever figure it out. I wonder, when you have government conspiracies, some have been proven true over many decades of declassified files, and some just remain forever I don't know, man, you've done some gray level stuff.
Right.
But I don't know if this is one of them,
I mean, we got more than I thought we would, to be honest.
Yeah.
Way more than I thought we would.
Yeah.
Like, actually finding stuff at the site. And I think at this point, the government wanted to, cover it up. They just went back up there and was like, okay, it's easier to spot and pick up now.
Yeah. Suddenly the mountain's just gone. They're like, there was never a mountain there. What are you talking about? Yeah. Well, this has been a fascinating one. I'm curious on your final thoughts on the theories. Is there anything that stands out to you? Anything that's was eyebrow raising, or any theories that are that feels like it's it?
I mean, not finding any bodies is very intriguing.
Mm-hmm. Not until the highly publicized and documented 2016 climb were any human remains found.
Yeah. It took so long to find human remains. I don't know. I guess surprisingly climate change, I think really played a big part here.
Yeah, the melting.
Yeah.
Kind of exposing new spots and
over decades exposing new spots.
Yeah.
I mean, they couldn't really find anything, and then they even classified it as these are experts being there's no remains, and all of a sudden it's well, we got remains all over the place. We decided to hike ourselves back up there. Two random guys. I'm what? This is crazy.
More conspiracy for me. What if they went up there and cleaned it all up, but they can't clean what's below the snow and ice? And so when it melted, the residual evidence was found.
Oh my God.
That feels kind of okay. That feels kind of maybe. Oh no.
I don't know, man.
Okay. My brain's going down the path. I got to stop. I got to pull us out.
Dude, that's, yeah. Yeah, it could be some cleaning. Could be a clean job. Mr. Clean could have came through.
Mopping it up with his pecs and biceps. Listen, this is a fascinating case with a lot of questions. I'm not sure, I think this might have just been pilot error mixed with a few unique circumstances that surround the El Alto airport, but otherwise, very fascinating. Fredo, thank you so much. Task Force, as always, thank you guys for supporting the show at patreon.com/redweb. Of course, if you want to support the show, we have merchandise and more coming out very soon at store.redwebpod.com. So keep an eye on our socials if you want to see when that comes out. And if you want discounts on that store, become an elite member over again at Patreon, and you'll get those monthly 15% discounts. But Fredo, with all that said, I will see you right back here next Monday for yet another mystery.